The air in the exclusive restaurant was thick with money and lies. At the most important table, Richard and Bianca Montgomery laughed, whispering cruel jokes about the silent Japanese millionaire, Mr. Tanaka. They were trying to swindle. They thought he was a fool who couldn't understand a word. They believed their waitress, Sarah, was just a servant, invisible and deaf to their schemes. They were wrong about everything. And by the time dessert was served, one person would walk out with a new life, and the others would walk into a nightmare they built themselves. The brass-plated door of L'Étoile d'Or was heavy. For Sarah Jenkins, it felt heavier every evening. It was the physical barrier between her two lives. Outside, she was just Sarah, a 32-year-old woman sharing a cramped, drafty apartment with two other waitresses, her share of the rent paid in crumpled bills that always smelled faintly of truffle oil and anxiety. Inside, she was Sarah, a ghost in a starched black apron, existing to anticipate needs before they were spoken. L'Étoile d'Or was not just a restaurant, it was a theatre for the wealthy of the city. The carpets were so thick they absorbed all sound, leaving only the hushed murmur of conversation and the delicate tink of crystal silver on porcelain. The chandeliers weren't just bright, they were designed to make diamonds, and dental veneers sparkle with equal intensity. Sarah was good at her job. She was quiet, efficient, and had perfected a placid, unobtrusive smile that revealed nothing. But beneath the smile, she was vibrating with a silent, simmering rage. This wasn't her life. This was a prison she'd been tricked into. 5 years ago, her feet hadn't ached from standing. They had clicked with purpose on the polished marble floors of the Viridian Global Tower. She'd been Sarah Jenkins, the youngest ever head of acquisitions, a linguistic prodigy who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals in 3 languages before her morning coffee. She had a corner office with a view of the entire city, a wardrobe of sharp, bespoke suits, and a future so bright it was blinding. Then came the misappropriation, the $20 million Kyoto Tech merger, the funds that vanished, the digital trail that led, impossibly, directly to her encrypted servers. She remembered the blur of the internal investigation, the condescending pity from the board, and she remembered the face of the man who had slid the final piece of evidence across the table, his eyes full of fake sympathy. Richard Montgomery. He was her direct superior, the head of the entire Western Division. He had been her mentor. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he had said, his voice a gravelly performance of regret. "I truly thought you were better than this." She was fired, blacklisted. The scandal was just quiet enough to avoid the press, but loud enough to ensure no other firm in their world would ever touch her. The legal fees to fight it would have bankrupted her. So she'd taken the severance, drained her savings, and disappeared. Now, her fluent Japanese, German, and French were used only to decipher the wine list for tourists. Tonight, the restaurant was electric. Marcus, the perpetually stressed manager, gathered the staff for the pre-shift briefing, his hands fluttering. "Listen up, people," he hissed, adjusting his bow tie. "Tonight is zero-mistake territory. Table 12, our best table, is booked for Richard Montgomery." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Richard Montgomery. It couldn't be. Not the Richard Montgomery. The city was large, but the world of extreme wealth was small. "He's bringing the whale," Marcus continued, oblivious to Sarah's sudden pallor. "The ungettable fish, Mr. Kaito Tanaka." A different jolt, one of professional admiration, shot through Sarah. Kaito Tanaka, the CEO of Tanaka Industries, a legend, a veritable titan of tech and logistics who had personally rebuilt the Japanese tech sector. He was known for being brilliant, reclusive, and utterly ruthless in his investments. "The Montgomerys are pitching him on their new company," Marcus said. "This deal, if it lands, is worth billions. Mrs. Montgomery, Bianca, will be particular. She wants flawless service, No interruptions, no mistakes. Sarah, you're on table 12. You're my best. Don't make me regret it. Sarah just nodded, her mind a screaming vortex. She couldn't serve him. The man who had taken her life, her name, her future. She looked at the door, thinking of running. But the rent was due. Her roommate needed medication. The weight of reality was heavier than the weight of the past. "Yes, Marcus," she said, her voice a dead, flat thing. She smoothed her apron, her hands trembling just slightly. She took a deep breath, reinforcing the wall inside her. She was not Sarah Jenkins, the fallen executive. She was Sarah, the waitress, an invisible ghost. She would be invisible. She would serve them their expensive food and their vintage wine. She would watch the man who ruined her celebrate his continued success, and she would die a little more inside. The Montgomerys did not simply arrive, they made an entrance. Bianca Montgomery swept in first, a cloud of perfume so expensive it was almost offensive. She was draped in a silk dress the color of a fresh oil slick, and diamonds glittered at her ears, her throat, and on nearly every finger. She didn't look at the maitre d', she simply surveyed the room as if deciding whether to buy it or burn it down. Richard Montgomery followed, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He was exactly as Sarah remembered, only more so. His suit was impossibly well tailored, his hair perfectly coiffed with distinguished silver at the temples, his smile wide and blindingly white. He radiated the smug, unassailable confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his life. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder, a gesture not of friendship, but of ownership. "Marcus, my friend, the usual table, I trust, and chill the Eloate Dom Perignon. We're celebrating tonight." "Of course, Mr. Montgomery. A pleasure, Mrs. Montgomery," Marcus simpered, bowing slightly. Sarah watched from the service station, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. He hadn't changed at all. He didn't even scan the staff. Why would he? To him, they were furniture that moved. She busied herself with polishing glasses, her back to them, listening. "Richard, make sure that translator isn't late," Bianca snapped, her voice a sharp whisper as they were seated. "I will not have this dinner ruined by some scheduling mix-up. This Nexus Core thing needs to work." "Darling, relax," Richard soothed, his voice dripping with false confidence. "I've handled it. The translator is the best in the city. He'll be here. Everything is under control." A moment later, their guest arrived. If the Montgomerys were a fireworks display, Kaito Tanaka was a black hole. He entered with no fanfare. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, slender and dressed in a simple, perfectly cut dark suit that made Richard's flashy pinstripes look gaudy. His face was lined with thought and intelligence, and his eyes, sharp and dark, missed nothing. He moved with an economy of motion, an understated grace that commanded more respect than all of Bianca's diamonds. He bowed slightly to Marcus, a gesture of profound, old-world respect that visibly flustered the manager. Richard jumped up, his smile wide and false. "Tanaka-san! Welcome, welcome! So glad you could make it. This is my wife, Bianca." Bianca offered a limp, beer-ringed hand. "A pleasure." Mr. Tanaka just looked at her hand for a moment, before giving another small, polite bow. He said nothing. Sarah, her tray balanced, approached the table. This was it. She kept her eyes down, her face set in the mask of placid service. "Good evening," she murmured. "May I offer you water to begin? Still or sparkling?" Richard didn't even look at her. "Sparkling." 3. "And the champagne, quickly." But as Sarah poured the water, she felt a gaze. It wasn't Richard or Bianca. It was Mr. Tanaka. He was watching her, not with interest, but with a quiet, analytical scrutiny, the same way he seemed to be scrutinizing the salt shaker, the flower arrangement, and the knot on Richard's tie. "So," Richard began, leaning forward. "My translator, Mr. Davies, seems to be, stuck in traffic. A terrible accident on the bridge, just terrible. But no matter, we can start. Nexus Core is, quite simply, the future." Mr. Tanaka raised an eyebrow. He sipped his water. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, melodic, and entirely in Japanese. He said, "Montgomery-san, it is poor form to begin a negotiation of this magnitude without the proper facilitators. If your translator is delayed, perhaps we should reschedule." Richard and Bianca stared. They blinked. Richard let out a nervous laugh. "Right, well, great to be here." He raised his glass. A toast. Mr. Tanaka just watched him, his expression unreadable. Richard, faltering, turned to his wife. He doesn't speak any English? At all? The briefing said limited English." "Apparently not, you idiot," Bianca hissed, her smile frozen in place. "Davies was your one job. Where is he?" "I don't know," Richard hissed back. I'll use simple words. It's fine." He turned back to Mr. Tanaka, his voice suddenly loud and slow, as if speaking to a child. "We are Nexus Core, AI, technology, big money for you." Mr. Tanaka's face remained impassive, but Sarah, pulling back from the table, saw a tiny muscle in his jaw tighten. She retreated to the shadows of the service station, her body trembling. This was worse than she imagined. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a farce. And the man who had stolen her career, her very identity, was now the ringmaster of this humiliating circus. The stage was set for a disaster. The dinner service began, and with it, the slow-motion train wreck. Sarah moved like an automaton. She delivered the amuse-bouche, a delicate bite of scallop ceviche. Bianca pushed it around her plate with a tiny fork and a look of profound boredom. Richard was already sweating, his expensive suit suddenly looking too tight. "So, Nexus Core," Richard ploughed on, pulling out his phone. "Look, pictures, graphs, big, numbers, go, up." He held the screen up to Mr. Tanaka's face. Mr. Tanaka did not look at the phone. He looked at Richard. He then spoke again, in the same calm, formal Japanese. "The visual aids are meaningless without context," he said. "I have read your preliminary white paper. Your projections for data processing speed are optimistic. They seem to rely on a quantum algorithm that, to my knowledge, has not yet been stabilized. Can you speak to that?" Richard, of course, heard only a string of foreign syllables. He laughed nervously. "Yes, absolutely. Optimistic is right. We are very optimistic. It's a rocket ship, Tanaka-san." Sarah, placing a bread basket on the table, had to physically bite her tongue. She understood every word Mr. Tanaka had said. He wasn't confused. He was a surgeon, and he had just inserted a scalpel into the precise weak point of their pitch. Bianca, sensing her husband's failure, tried a different approach. She leaned forward, offering Mr. Tanaka a dazzling, predatory smile. "You like wine? This is Dom Perignon, very kokyu." She butchered the Japanese word for high class, turning it into a garbled mess. Mr. Tanaka's eyes flickered with something, annoyance perhaps, or just profound weariness. He replied in Japanese, "The wine is adequate, but my interest is in the structural integrity of your company, not the cellar of the restaurant you've chosen." He likes the wine," Bianca chirped, clapping her hands. "Richard, he likes the wine. We're connecting." As Sarah retreated, she could hear them shift tactics. Believing Mr. Tanaka was a silent, uncomprehending figurehead, they began to speak to each other. About him. "This is a waste of time," Bianca whispered venomously, concealed by the arrival of the appetizer, a foie gras torchon. He's just some old-world fossil. He probably doesn't even know what AI is." "He knows what money is, B," Richard muttered, sawing at his bread. His translator must have told him the basics. We just need a signature. The man's a living ATM. Look at him, just nodding. He's probably half asleep. He looks like he's thinking about, I don't know, bonsai trees. Bianca sneered, taking a delicate bite. "God, this is tedious. Just smile and nod, Richard. We'll get the signature and we can get out of here. I'll have Davies, or whatever his name is, fix it in the morning." Sarah felt a hot, acidic anger rise in her throat. She had negotiated with Kaito Tanaka's competitors in Tokyo. She knew his reputation. They weren't just misjudging him. They were insulting one of the most brilliant minds in modern industry. And they were doing it right in front of him. She returned to the table with the main course, a dry-aged duck breast for the Montgomerys, and a simple grilled branzino for Mr. Tanaka, which he had requested specifically. As she set the plate down, Mr. Tanaka spoke again, his voice carrying a new edge of frustration. "Montgomery-san, your patent applications for Nexus Core. I had my team investigate. They appear to be copies. Near identical to a defunct project from Viridian Global 5 years ago. A project called Kyoto Tech." Sarah's hand slipped. A single drop of a raspberry reduction sauce splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Sarah, clumsy girl," Bianca snapped without looking at her. "Clean that up." Sarah's heart was hammering so hard she thought it would break a rib. Kyoto Tech. That was her project, the one she had built, the one she was framed for. Richard's face, for the first time, lost its smile, a flicker of genuine panic. What did he say?" he asked his wife. "How should I know? He's just babbling," Bianca said. "Richard, your face. You look like you've seen a ghost." He's asking about the duck," Richard improvised, desperately. "He wants to know if it's good." "Yes, it's good, Tanaka-san. Very oishi." He gave a hearty, idiotic thumbs up. This was too much. The insult to Mr. Tanaka was one thing. The insult to Sarah's own stolen legacy was another. Mr. Tanaka looked at Richard's thumbs up with utter disdain. He pushed his fish away, untouched. Then his sharp eyes found Sarah. He looked directly at her, not as a waitress, but as a person, and he said, in Japanese, "This is a fine establishment, but the company is deeply lacking. A shame to waste the evening." He was speaking to her, or perhaps just to the air. But he was testing something. Sarah stood frozen, her blood roaring. Richard and Bianca were now arguing in low, vicious whispers, their facade cracking. "You said you buried that Viridian thing," Bianca spat. "I did. It's dead." He can't know. He's just talking," Richard whispered back, dabbing his forehead with a napkin. "He's not just talking, you fool. He's asking questions." "It doesn't matter if he understands or not." Richard's voice was rising. "We just need the signature. I'll get him drunk." He grabbed the champagne bottle. "More, Tanaka-san? More. Nomu." Mr. Tanaka watched him, his face a mask of stone. Sarah knew this was the moment, the pivot point. She could stay silent, collect her tip, and go home to her cold apartment, letting this man, this thief, win again. Or she could light the match. The memory of her old office, her pride, her name. It flooded back. She was done being a ghost. The entire dinner had been a performance of arrogance, a theater of the absurd, but Richard Montgomery was now approaching his disastrous finale. He was desperate. The deal was slipping, and his polished veneer was melting under the heat of his own panic. He leaned across the table, his voice losing its forced bonhomie and taking on a wheedling, pleading tone. Look, Kaito. May I call you Kaito? It's simple. We have the tech. You have the yen. Lots of yen. We put them together. Boom. Everyone is rich. He slid a heavy, leather-bound document portfolio and a glittering gold pen across the table. Just sign. Right here. My translator, Davies, he assured me you were ready to sign tonight. He said the terms were agreed upon. Mr. Tanaka looked at the English language contract. He looked at the pen. He did not touch either. Instead, he spoke, and this time his voice was not calm or questioning. It was cold and final. He delivered a long, sharp, and surgically precise sentence in Japanese. This is not a negotiation. This is a child's fantasy. Your Nexus core is built on stolen technology. Your projections are fraudulent, and your partner, he glanced at Bianca, is as transparently grasping as you are. You have wasted my time. This meeting is over. Richard and Bianca stared, uncomprehending. The tone, however, was unmistakable. What's he on about now? Bianca hissed, her knuckles white as she gripped her wine glass. Richard, he's angry. Fix it. Smile at him. Richard's face was a rictus of a grin. He must be concerned about the market. Yes, the market is strong, very strong. But Richard's desperation had made him sloppy, and his arrogance sought a target. He needed to reassert his dominance. He looked around, and his eyes landed on Sarah, who was standing stiffly by the service station, watching. This was his final, fatal mistake. He's probably just confused. Tired, Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. He laughed, a loud, braying sound that made a neighboring table look over. Maybe the old man just needs to use the little boy's room. He's been drinking all that water. He turned and snapped his fingers at Sarah, a gesture of profound disrespect. Sweetheart. Come here. Sarah's feet moved on their own. She approached the table, her face pale, her eyes locked on his. This gentleman, Richard said, gesturing to Mr. Tanaka as if he were a piece of luggage, needs the benjo. He made a crude, miming gesture of flushing a toilet. Can you point him? Show him. Toi? You understand. Tuire. The restaurant, in that moment, seemed to fade. The chandeliers, the murmuring diners, the scent of food. It all dissolved. There was only the sound of Richard Montgomery's voice, the echo of the word benjo, a rude, informal term for toilet, and the sight of Mr. Tanaka's face, which had finally gone rigid with controlled fury. This was the last straw, the humiliation of a great man, the smug, victorious face of the thief who had stolen her life. The convergence was too perfect. Sarah set her empty water pitcher down on the service tray. Her hands were not shaking. They were perfectly, terrifyingly still. She took one step toward the table. She did not look at Richard. She did not look at Bianca. She looked directly into the eyes of Kaito Tanaka. She drew a single, steadying breath, and she spoke. The restaurant was not silent, but it felt silent. The only sound was Sarah's voice, clear, respectful, and absolutely flawless. She spoke in perfect, high-level business, Japanese, keigo, the formal, honorific language used for royalty and the highest echelons of business. Tanaka-sama, she began, her voice resonating with a power she hadn't used in 5 years. She bowed, not deeply, but with the precise, correct angle of professional respect. Mr. Tanaka, my name is Jenkins, and I am the server for this table. On behalf of this establishment, I offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for this vile and disrespectful behavior. The effect was instantaneous. Richard and Bianca Montgomery froze. Their smiles, their whispers, their very breathing, stopped. Richard's hand, which had been reaching for the champagne, hovered in mid-air. Bianca's heavily ringed hand froze on its way to her wine glass. Their faces were twin masks of pure, unadulterated shock, their mouths literally hanging open. The blood drained from Richard's face, leaving him a sickly, pale grey. "What? What did you—" he stammered. But the most important reaction was from Mr. Tanaka. The stone mask on his face cracked. The tension fled his shoulders. A slow, knowing, and profoundly appreciative smile spread across his lips. His eyes, which had been cold and angry, now sparkled with sudden intense interest. He leaned forward, ignoring the Montgomerys completely, and replied to Sarah in the same formal Japanese. "Jenkins-san, your Japanese is impeccable, as clear and precise as a blade. It is the first intelligent thing I have heard all evening. Please stand. You have nothing to apologize for." Sarah straightened, her spine feeling like steel for the first time in half a decade. She felt the eyes of the entire room on her, but her focus was a laser, aimed at the 3 people at the table. Richard was sputtering. What is this? A joke? You're the waitress." "I am," Sarah said, her voice a cold, even English. She then turned back to Mr. Tanaka, continuing their conversation as if the Montgomerys were irrelevant background noise. "Tanaka-sama," she said in Japanese, "these people do not represent the respect our city holds for you. They are charlatans. I have been listening. You were asking about the stabilization of the quantum algorithm for their Nexus Core project." Mr. Tanaka nodded, his smile widening. "I was. They seemed to think I was asking about the fish." "And you mentioned," Sarah continued, her heart pounding a battle rhythm, "the patent applications, their similarity to a defunct project from Viridian Global, Kyoto Tech." Richard Montgomery shot to his feet. You're fired," he bellowed at Sarah. "Marcus, get this eavesdropper out of here." "Sit down, Richard," Bianca hissed, her voice a venomous snake. She was smarter than her husband. She saw where this was going. She knew they were no longer in control. "Richard Montgomery," Sarah said, finally turning her full attention to the man who had ruined her. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the restaurant's hush. "You don't remember me, do you?" He stared at her, his face a mixture of rage and dawning, sickening confusion. I've never seen you before in my life." 5 years ago, Sarah said. "I was Sarah Jenkins, head of acquisitions at Viridian Global, your division. I wore a grey suit, not a black apron. I built the Kyoto Tech merger from the ground up. It was my patent, my algorithm, my deal." The colour vanished from Richard's face. He looked at her, as if she were, in fact, a ghost. "Jenkins. No, it can't be. She was a thief. I was framed," Sarah said, her voice ringing with the truth. "By you. You couldn't crack the merger yourself, so you let me do it. Then, when the deal was signed, you siphoned 20 million from the holding account, buried the transaction in my server logs, and presented the evidence to the board yourself. You destroyed my name, my career, and my life, all so you could take credit for my work and cover your own embezzlement." Bianca looked at her husband, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. "Richard, what is this? This server talking about?" "She's lying," Richard shrieked, his voice cracking. "It's slander. I'll sue you. I'll sue the restaurant," Sarah said, turning back to the millionaire, her Japanese fluent and cutting. "Mr. Tanaka, he insists Nexus Core is his. But it is nothing more than a stolen, rebranded version of my project, Kyoto Tech." She looked back at Richard. "You didn't even bother to change the core code, did you? You just gave it a flashy new name and hoped no one would ever look at the bones. But Mr. Tanaka did, because he's not a fool, he's a titan. And you're just a common thief in an expensive suit." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stood, pale and trembling, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Bianca's perfectly made-up face was a mask of cold fury and calculation. She was no longer looking at Sarah. She was looking at her husband with pure contempt. Then, Mr. Tanaka did the last thing anyone expected. He held up a single imperious hand, and he spoke, in perfect, unaccented, boardroom-level English. "Mr. Montgomery, your deception is profoundly disappointing. But your assumptions," he said, his voice dropping to a cold, quiet register, "are insulting. This new shock, Mr. Tanaka's flawless English, was the final blow. It landed with the force of a physical impact." Bianca let out a small, strangled gasp. Richard looked as if he'd been shot. You speak English?" Richard stammered, his entire body shaking. "Of course I do," Mr. Tanaka said, folding his napkin and placing it neatly beside his plate. "I also speak German, French, and Mandarin. I find, however, that allowing people to believe I am limited is a most effective filter. It reveals character, or in your case, the profound lack of it." He let that sink in, his cold gaze sweeping over the two of them. "I understood every word, Mr. Montgomery. Your condescending shouts, your simple words, your wife's insults about my age and my bonsai trees. I understood your frantic, whispered conspiracy about burying the Viridian project. And I most certainly," he added, his voice dripping with ice, "understood your charming invitation to the Benjo." He turned his gaze to Sarah, and his entire demeanor softened. "Miss Jenkins, I remember your name now. Viridian Global. You negotiated the Kyoto Tech merger. It was a brilliant piece of work. The scandal that followed, I remember reading the internal report. It always seemed clumsy, out of character for a negotiator of your precision." "It was a fabrication, sir," Sarah said, her voice thick with 5 years of unshed tears, yet stronger than it had ever been. "He buried the evidence, locked me out of the system, and used me as a scapegoat to cover his own theft. It's a lie!" Richard finally roared, finding his voice. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "I will have you arrested. This is insane. I am Richard Montgomery. You're nobody." "Mr. Montgomery," Mr. Tanaka said, and his voice was so quiet it was terrifying. "You are correct about one thing. This is insane." He pulled out his phone. It was not a flashy new model. It was a simple, functional device. He tapped the screen twice. "You seem to be under the impression," Mr. Tanaka continued, "that you are pitching a deal to me, that I am simply an investor in your company. You have, once again, failed to do your research." He looked at Richard. 5 years ago, I was very impressed with the Kyoto Tech merger. So impressed that 2 years ago, when Viridian Global's stock faltered, I led a quiet consortium of investors. We bought a 51% controlling interest. Richard's jaw unhinged. You own Viridian?" "I am the majority shareholder," Mr. Tanaka corrected, "which means, Mr. Montgomery, that for the last 2 years you have been my employee. And I love digging through old files, especially when I suspect one of my executives is attempting to defraud me using another one of my own assets." Bianca made a sound like a deflating balloon. She sank back into her chair, her face the color of ash. "My legal team," Mr. Tanaka continued, "began a quiet audit of your division 6 weeks ago, when you first proposed this Nexus Core meeting. Your stolen 20 million from the Kyoto Tech deal? They found it. It's sitting in a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, registered in your wife's maiden name. Bianca physically recoiled from her husband. You, and your revolutionary Nexus Core AI? Mr. Tanaka smiled, a thin, cold smile. It's nothing but Ms. Jenkins's original code. You didn't even have the intelligence to change the developer's signature. Her digital fingerprints are all over it. You are not only a thief, Mr. Montgomery. You are a lazy one. Richard Montgomery collapsed into his chair. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was just a man in a nice suit, a hollow shell, his life publicly and professionally detonating. So, no, Mr. Tanaka said. I will not be investing in your company. I will, however, be dissolving it. And you will be hearing from my legal team. Not for a negotiation, for an indictment. Several, in fact. Embezzlement, wire fraud, intellectual property theft. The list is quite long. He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. Bianca, seeing her entire world, the diamonds, the house, the status, evaporating, turned on her husband. "You idiot!" she shrieked, her voice no longer a whisper. "You ruined us! You arrogant, stupid, stupid fool!" She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it at him. Richard flinched as red wine and glass shattered against the wall behind him. The hard karma had arrived. It was not gentle and it was not subtle. It was a complete and total annihilation. Mr. Tanaka looked at the chaos for a moment, then turned his back on them. He looked at Sarah. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice now warm, "your old job is insufficient for your talents. As I mentioned, I am the majority owner of Viridian. I am also opening a new North American headquarters for Tanaka Industries. I require a chief operating officer, someone with integrity, linguistic skill, and a deep understanding of AI patent law. It seems you are uniquely qualified." He smiled. "My car is outside. We have much to discuss. If," he added, with a polite glance at her apron, "you are available." Sarah's mind was a perfect, crystalline blank. For a full 5 seconds, the world had no sound. There was only the stunned, fish-like gaping of Marcus the manager, the statue-like paralysis of the other diners, and the tableau at table 12. Richard Montgomery, a broken man-child slumped in a $5,000 suit, and his wife Bianca, whose face was a kabuki mask of pure, murderous hatred, a hatred directed not at Sarah, but at the fool she had married. The sharp, acidic smell of spilled Dom Perignon hung over them like a shroud. Then the world rushed back in. Sarah felt the last 5 years of crushing, relentless shame, the aching feet, the cold apartment, the smell of truffle oil she'd come to loathe, the unbearable weight of injustice. Simply lift. It evaporated. It was gone, as if a spell had been broken. She looked at Richard, this small, pathetic man who had held such power over her, who had been the boogeyman in her mind for half a decade. He was nothing. A hollow shell. A ghost in a life he hadn't even built. Just stolen. Her hands moved with a calm, deliberate grace she didn't know she possessed. She reached behind her back and untied the 2 simple strings of her apron. The starched black fabric, which had felt like a lead-lined yoke for so long, felt light as a single sheet of paper. She folded it once, then twice, her movements crisp and final. She stepped forward, past the shattered wine glass, and placed the folded apron neatly in the center of the table, right on top of the fraudulent, unsigned Nexus Core contract. "I quit," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was the only sound in the entire restaurant. It was the gavel on a trial, the period at the end of a long, terrible chapter. She turned away from the wreckage of the Montgomerys' lives without a second glance. She looked at Mr. Kaito Tanaka, who was watching her with an expression of profound, quiet approval. "I am available," she said. He nodded once, a gesture of deep, mutual respect. "Excellent. My car is waiting." He turned and began to walk, and Sarah, her spine as straight and strong as a steel girder, followed him. They walked out of L'Etoile d'Or. Sarah didn't look back. She walked past the gawking, frozen staff. Marcus, her former manager, just stared, his mouth still open, holding a stack of menus he'd forgotten he was holding. The other diners, sensing the drama had concluded, slowly returned to their conversations, though now they were all whispering about what they had just witnessed. At the heavy brass doors, the valet, a young man who hadn't even looked at Sarah when she'd arrived for her shift, now saw her walking beside a man who radiated quiet, planetary power. The valet practically tripped over himself to pull the door open, bowing his head. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening, Mom," he murmured. Sarah stepped out into the cool night air. It hit her face, and for the first time in 1,826 days, she felt like she could actually breathe. The air felt different. It was the air of her future. A black, impossibly sleek car, a custom-model Lexus Century, not a flashy Rolls-Royce, glided to the curb. A driver in a dark suit emerged and opened the rear door. Mr. Tanaka gestured for Sarah to enter first. She slid onto the plush, cream-colored leather. The door closed with a silent, bank vault thud, and the sounds of the city vanished. The inside of the car was a cocoon of polished wood, brushed metal, and absolute silence. They pulled away from the curb. Sarah stared out the window, watching the glittering, indifferent city lights slide by. And now, finally, now that she was safe, the adrenaline began to recede, leaving her hands trembling so hard she had to clasp them in her lap. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, and she suddenly felt lightheaded. "It is, I find," Mr. Tanaka's calm voice said from beside her, "a common reaction. The body does not realize the danger has passed until it is well and truly clear of the battlefield." He pressed a small, unmarked button on his armrest. A refrigerated compartment hummed open, revealing chilled bottles of water. He passed one to her. "Please, you've earned it." Her hands were shaking so much she fumbled the cap. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice suddenly small. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Miss Jenkins," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Ever again. Not for this." She drank the water. It was the best water she had ever tasted. They drove in silence for several minutes, letting the city blur past, letting her breathing return to normal. "You are, I presume," Mr. Tanaka said finally, wondering if that was a real job offer or simple battlefield dramatics. Sarah turned to look at him. I wasn't sure. It happened so fast. Sir, my life, for the last 5 years." "It was," he interrupted, his gaze direct and serious. "The most serious and calculated job offer of my career. The position of Chief Operating Officer for Tanaka North America is very real. The headquarters is, at present, a leased floor in the Viridian building, which I am reclaiming, but we are breaking ground on the new Tanaka Tower next month. It will be your tower to run." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I do not hire people for their resumes, Miss Jenkins. I hire them for their character. I saw your resume 5 years ago. It was brilliant. I saw your character tonight. It is unbreakable. You possess linguistic skill, technical knowledge, and an unshakable core of integrity. You also possess a 5-year, street-level education in what happens when arrogant, foolish men are allowed to fail upwards. I do not need another executive. I need a warrior, I need someone who knows the cost of failure. That is you." Sarah felt the tears she had refused to shed for 5 years finally welling up. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of overwhelming, crushing relief. A dam inside her had broken. I don't even have a suit," she whispered, the absurd, practical thought tumbling out. My apartment." Mr. Tanaka allowed himself a small, kind smile. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a simple, impossibly elegant business card made of thin, black metal. "This is the personal number for Akemi Yano. She is my chief of staff. She is waiting for your call. She will arrange for a preliminary, multi-year contract to be messengered to you by 9:10 a.m. She will arrange for a corporate apartment in the Carlisle residences to be made available for you immediately. Tonight, if you wish. She will also facilitate a direct transfer for your signing bonus, which I trust will be more than sufficient to acquire a new wardrobe." He paused, his eyes kind. "You will never have to worry about rent or suits or disrespectful men ever again. Your only worry, Miss Jenkins, will be building an empire with me. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah wiped her eyes, not with the back of her hand, but with a sudden, returning sense of dignity. She sat up straight. The trembling had stopped. "Yes, Mr. Tanaka," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am." The fall of the House of Montgomery was not a single event. It was a complete and total disintegration, a public unraveling that the city's elite watched with rapt fascination. The hard karma Sarah had always wished for wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a slow, agonizing disassembly. The very next day, Mr. Tanaka's legal team, acting as the majority shareholder of Viridian Global, filed a motion to freeze all assets belonging to Richard and Bianca Montgomery, pending a full internal and federal investigation. The charges, as Mr. Tanaka had listed, were long: embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy, and catastrophic intellectual property theft. Richard, stripped of his lawyers and his credit cards, was arrested 2 days later, not in his mansion, but in a mid-range airport hotel, attempting to flee the country on a fake passport. The most brutal karma, however, was reserved for Bianca. 3 months had passed. Sarah was now living in a sun-drenched apartment on the 50th floor, overlooking the park. She was on her way to a preliminary architecture review for the new Tanaka Tower, her briefcase in hand, wearing a dark blue bespoke Armani suit that Akemi Yano had insisted upon. She was walking down Madison Avenue when she saw her. Bianca Montgomery was coming out of a high-end consignment shop, the kind of place where the wealthy discreetly sold last season's items. But Bianca wasn't a customer. She was a seller, and she looked haggard. The perfect blonde hair was brassy at the roots. The $1 million face was puffy and blotched with anger. She was still wearing expensive clothes, but they hung on her, looking unkempt, as if she'd slept in them. She was arguing with the shop's owner. "That is a limited edition Birkin." Bianca's voice was shrill, attracting stares. "It's worth $80,000. $7,000 is an insult." "The market's flooded, Mrs. Montgomery," the owner said, his voice flat and bored. "The federal auction of your assets started last week. Everyone's got one. Take the 7 or take it home. I don't care." Bianca snatched the check from his hand, her face a mask of fury. She turned to leave, and, in that moment, her eyes met Sarah's. Sarah was standing on the sidewalk, watching. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was just watching. Bianca's face went through a rapid, ugly series of emotions: confusion, dawning recognition, and then a deep, burning, visceral hatred. This was the woman who had listened. This was the server, the nothing, who had brought her entire world crashing down. "You!" Bianca hissed, taking a step toward her. Sarah just held her gaze. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Her suit, her clear eyes, her calm demeanor, her very existence was the final word. Bianca, seeing the woman who had taken her place in the world, visibly deflated. The fight went out of her. She was, in that moment, just a desperate woman in last season's clothes. She broke eye contact, clutched her pathetic check, and hurried away, swallowed by the crowd. She hadn't lost her money. She had lost her status. And for Bianca, that was a fate worse than death. As for Richard, his end was finalized a month later. Sarah read it not in the newspapers, but in a confidential memo forwarded by Mr. Tanaka's legal team. Richard Montgomery, it read, facing overwhelming and irrefutable evidence, has pled guilty to 12 counts. In a bid for a reduced sentence, he has provided testimony against 3 other executives in his former division, implicating them in a wider kickback scheme. Sarah closed the tablet. He was a thief to the very end, selling out his own co-conspirators to save himself. He received 15 years in federal prison, a fitting end for a man who had never earned an honest dollar in his life. 6 months after that fateful dinner, Sarah stood in a glass-walled conference room on the 80th floor of the new Tanaka Tower. Her office. The view was panoramic, god-like, stretching from the river to the ocean. She was not alone. She was at the head of a long, polished table, commanding a video conference with the entire Tanaka Industries Board of Directors in Tokyo. It was 9 p.m. in Tokyo, 7 a.m. her time. One of the executives, a stern, older man named Mr. Watanabe, was challenging her. He spoke in rapid, complex, honorific Japanese, his tone skeptical. "Jenkins-san," he said, "your proposal, this Project Phoenix, is ambitious, but it appears to be a resurrection of the failed Kyoto Tech asset. Tanaka Industries is not in the business of sentiment. We are in the business of innovation. We question the value of reviving a 5-year-old compromised algorithm." The air in the room was tense. Sarah's new team of engineers, hired by her, looked at her nervously. Sarah took a sip of green tea. She did not falter. She did not look at her notes. She looked directly into the camera and replied in even more formal, precise keigo, her voice resonating with absolute, cold authority. "Watanabe-san, your concern for innovation is the very reason we are having this meeting. You are correct that the name is sentimental. I believe in honoring the past I have reclaimed. But," she said, pressing a button, "the algorithm is the future." A new set of data flashed onto the screen in Tokyo. "You are looking at the 2020 code. I am presenting the 2025 code. For the last 6 months, my team and I have not just revived it. We have rebuilt it from the ground up, integrating the quantum stabilization principles you yourself published in your 2023 thesis." Watanabe's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "It is not 40% faster than our current models," Sarah continued, her voice cutting. "As of 4 a.m. this morning, our final stress test clocked it as 58% faster, with a 0.03% margin of error. This isn't sentiment. This is a multi-billion-dollar revolution. This is the new industry standard. Your standard, Watanabe-san." There was a long, profound silence on the video feed. Mr. Watanabe, a man feared on 2 continents, stared at his data. He processed it. Then, slowly, he stood up in his Tokyo boardroom, and he bowed. "My deepest apologies, Jenkins-san," he said. "The data is conclusive. I withdraw my objection. I move to fully fund Project Phoenix, effective immediately." One by one, the other faces on the screen nodded. Mr. Tanaka, in a small window on the call, had not said a word. He was just watching, a small, fiercely proud smile on his face. The meeting ended. Sarah stood alone in her vast office as the sun began to truly light up the city. She had done it. She hadn't just gotten her old job back. She hadn't just gotten revenge. She had taken her stolen legacy and turned it into the flagship of a global empire. Her assistant, a bright young woman named Maya, knocked and entered. "Ms. Jenkins, your car is ready for the Viridian building walkthrough, and this was just delivered for you from Mr. Tanaka's office." It was a small, beautiful lacquered box. Sarah opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not a bonus check or a piece of jewelry. It was a single, simple, impossibly elegant gold pin. The official insignia of the Tanaka Industries Board of Directors. Beneath it lay a small, thick card with a few lines of handwritten text. "Sarah, character is not revealed in success, but in how one rises from failure. You didn't just rise, you soared. It is my honor. Welcome to the board." KT Sarah picked up the pin. She walked to the glass wall, looking down at the city that had once dismissed her. She looked at her reflection. The woman in the powerful suit, the clear, intelligent eyes, the face that was no longer haunted by the past. She saw the waitress. She saw the executive. And for the first time, she saw that they were the same woman. Whole, unbroken. She fastened the pin to the lapel of her suit, took a deep, steadying breath, and turned away from the window. "Let's go, Maya," she said, picking up her briefcase. "We have an old building to tear down, and a new one to build." And that, as they say, is what happens when arrogance and greed sit down to dinner with integrity and patience. Richard and Bianca Montgomery thought they were the predators, but they were just playing in a tiger's cage. They underestimated the silent millionaire, and they never even saw the waitress. It's a powerful reminder that the people you dismiss as nobodies are often the ones holding all the cards. True karma in real life doesn't always show up, but when it does, it doesn't forget. What did you think of Sarah's incredible comeback? And what about Mr. Tanaka's perfect trap? Let me know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. If you love stories of hard karma and dramatic real-life twists, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to see that life can change in an instant. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single story. Thank you for listening.